Welcome everyone. This is the Climate People Powered Movement webinar series from Saving Life on Earth. And my name is Brittany. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Saving Life on Earth campaigner. First and foremost, I want to say that I'm coming to you live from Tohono O'odham land, and I think it's very important as an Indigenous woman to recognize the land that I am occupying right now. And there is a slide. My introduction slide has the website that you can also check out what land that you're occupying. It's native-land.ca. So with that, I will begin with saying that climate change affects everyone from the tiniest little clam to all of us on this call. So it's super important, to the Saving Life on Earth campaign and, to all of us to really look at those intersections of climate change and people power and how we all have the power to make change. Okay, cool. Here's a slide. So I have some photos. There's one of me at the Grand Canyon, and I was there asking for the protections of the Grand Canyon from uranium mining. And then the one with Oak Flat is at the March for Oak Flat, which happens annually with the Apache Stronghold asking or demanding that Resolution Copper not build a mine on sacred land to the Apache people. And then the bottom photo is at Protecting Mother Earth conference, and I included this one because it just shows the power of people. And we were there talking about the intersections of environmental justice and missing and murdered Indigenous women and the extractive industry. So super important that we all band together to demand change. And then on this call, you're going to hear more from some really awesome staff who are going to introduce themselves in a few minutes after we get some housekeeping things out of the way. Like the chat is disabled because we heard from y'all that it got really distracting. And then we have a Q&A at the end. So feel free to post your questions in that Q&A and we'll record them and we'll go through it. We'll have time at the end to go through those questions. And if your question is not answered, jump on Slack tomorrow at 12 p.m. Pacific time, and Ben and myself will be there to help answer any questions that got left out. We have an action alert, which we'll send the link for at the end, and that's to stop handouts to big oil. So that's something you can do today. And with that, I'm gonna pass the virtual mic to Cassie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cassie Siegel. I'm director of the Center's Climate Law Institute, and I've been working for the center since the late 1990s. And this work I do here is pretty much all I ever wanted to do. And we couldn't do it without the support of thousands of people like you. So thank you so much for coming today. Thank you so much for all of your support for the center. And it's really great to be together today. Electronically. I have some photos on my introductory slide here of a gigantic march in San Francisco in September 2008, and the photo on the left, that's the center crew, center staff and volunteers from the Oakland office lining up in front of the Ferry Building in San Francisco to march for climate justice with 30,000 people that day with our big Keep It in the Ground banner. So great to meet you all by webinar.
Awesome, thank you, Cassie, and give a virtual round of applause for Cassie. And then we're gonna have Ben introduce himself now.
Thank you, Brittany, and so wonderful to be here with all of you. I am a climate campaigner on our team based in Los Angeles, and I work with our national campaigns to keep fossil fuels in the ground, protect people and wildlife as we transition from dirty energy to 100% clean and renewable energy. And I grew up as a birder in a big city in New York City. And so for me, the urgency of addressing climate change as it impacts wildlife and people was always closely linked. So I have devoted my life and work to organizing with people across the country and the planet, and I'm so privileged to do that here at the center and with all of you. And you'll see here in this picture, one of the highlights of the past year has been collaborating with Jane Fonda and the National Fire Drill Fridays campaign. And here we were taking action with Los Angeles community members that are actually fighting neighborhood urban oil drilling right in their backyards. So it's really a horrible practice and poisons people and wildlife, and we'll talk more about how we're building the people-powered movement we need to stop that and the climate crisis.
Awesome, thank you, Ben. Another virtual round of applause. And last but definitely not least, we have Jean. So Jean, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Brittany. Hi, everyone. My name is Jean. I am the Energy Justice Program Director here at the Center. I used to be housed with Cassie and Ben, but have recently broken out in 2020. And we all work very closely together to fight the climate emergency. So my photos for you all are, the one on the right is actually really a wonderful thing to reflect on. This was the last huge climate march in Washington, D.C. And that is our crew from the center there. You'll see Frost Paul, who if you are a member, I'm sure you've seen him all across our website. And he is marching with our mighty center crew with the words fossil fuels equals climate change. And then on the left, you'll see Ben and I and Cassie, we are very active on the international realm to fight the climate emergency because it is global. And that is Ben and I at a recent international COP conference on climate. And I'm wondering if we can just switch to the next slide as well. Great, and I would be remiss not to talk about this. So I joined the center in 2015, and that was the year of the landmark Paris Agreement, and Cassie and I were there. And this is a picture of our my first real protest that I planned with Cassie to ban fracking. And this is, you can't see it that greatly, but it is in front of the UN in Paris during a time that was, the country was shaken by the Paris terror attacks. And we had a miraculous, incredible anti-fracking protest. And so, Cassie was holding down the police, the very aggressive police in Paris at that point because of the terrorist attacks. That's me in the our dress there. This is a particularly important protest for me because that is where I met my husband. We actually also planned this with Cassie as well, or my to-be husband, and he's also in that photo somewhere too. So there's a lot of goodwill in the climate movement here.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I didn't know that. And the last virtual round of applause for now, at least, thank you all. You're all awesome. And I can't wait to hear more about what you do. So with that, we can begin. And my first question is for Cassie. And it's, we all know that we can't save life on Earth without addressing the climate emergency. And the center's been on the forefront for a real long time. So can you tell us a little bit about the early days of the center's work with clean energy and energy justice and all of these different things?
Hi, thanks, Brittany. I would love to reflect on that for a minute because one of the things that I find so fascinating is the speed with which the scientific literature has developed on climate change, and particularly climate change and extinction. So in the 1990s, it was quite intuitive to us that climate change was going to quickly become the leading threat to biodiversity. And a colleague of ours here at the center, Brendan Cummings, in the 90s said, well, let's go find the articles and let's do an Endangered Species Act listing petition for a species that's threatened with extinction just because of climate change. And so we started going through the literature, and at that time it was like physically in the library. And we did find the first species, which was an ice-dependent species. And it was, it was the only one for which the papers has been published. And I'm wondering what species people may have in their minds that would be the first ice-dependent species threatened with extinction. I'm going to share my screen here and get some slides up. And so it was the Glacier Bay wolf spider. And I love this creature. I love its hairy little legs. For various reasons, we didn't actually, it lives in ice caves in Glacier Bay. We didn't actually do this petition, but it was in 2001, sorry, I need to advance the slides. 2001, actually, that the papers were published for this species. This is the Kitlitz's murrelet. And it's this gorgeous seabird that feeds at the base of tidewater glaciers. And this is actually the first Endangered Species Act petition I ever wrote, and the first one for a climate threatened species. But it wasn't until 2004 that I really see as this turning point for the literature. And in that summer, the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment came out, and that review told us a lot of what we're now seeing in terms of the very rapid warming in the Arctic and the melting of sea ice. And also that summer, two of the world's leading polar bear researchers published a paper documenting the decline of polar bear populations and predicting extinction for the bear if global warming wasn't curbed. And so we were able to do this petition, and because the science is so clear, and because the Endangered Species Act is such an amazing and such a strong law, and because polar bears are so amazing and people love them, we were actually able to get the G.W. Bush administration to list the polar bear under the Endangered Species Act. They really, really, really didn't want to, but they actually had to. And the polar bear and other Arctic species are in so much trouble because the Arctic is warming at about twice the rate of the rest of the Earth. And it's also part of an incredibly important climate feedback or vicious cycle. And the reason this is because when you have a snow and ice covered Arctic in the summer, it reflects most of the sun's energy back into space. But when you have mostly open water and land, then the Arctic absorbs most of the sun's energy and the warming speeds up. So that was Arctic sea ice extent in 1979. In the summer, that's the year the satellite record starts. And then in 2007, which was the second lowest year on record. And we're currently tied right now in terms of Arctic sea ice with the lowest year on record so far, tracking that. And so it's always been the case that if we can act soon enough to save the Arctic and polar bears, we'll be doing the same things that we need to do to save the rest of the planet as well. And this is for the many thousands of species, which, you know, just 15 years after the polar bear literature was published, we now know so many species are threatened with extinction. And these are just a few of those that the center is working to protect. And so a lot of harm has already been done. But the policy choices that we're making today are going to determine whether suffering and devastation is compounded or whether we make a brighter future for all of us. We can still make a difference. We can still save so much. And of course, there's so much left to be saved. There's huge changes. We need, the most important is leaving fossil fuels in the ground, stopping both the production and the consumption of fossil fuels. This is because 75% of the problem, so 75% of emissions overall, and actually 90% of carbon dioxide comes from burning fossil fuels. And writing the polar bear petition actually led me directly to working on oil and gas production, because we cannot save the polar bear without stopping fossil fuel production. That led me directly to being in opposition to the most powerful industry on earth. And I did not appreciate when I started this work how hard it was going to be to win. We have the technology we need to slash pollution. We have the laws we need, the successful pollution reduction programs we need to get so far down the road. And the changes we need, like to transportation and to land use patterns, are going to make the world safer, healthier, more equitable place for everybody. And so why is it so hard? And what I have come to learn is that there is one main reason why it's so hard, and that is fossil fuel companies. And just like tobacco companies who lied about the science, the fossil fuel companies, using actually some of the same consultants, they knew about the science, they lied about the science, and perhaps most importantly, they blocked solutions. They blocked the clean energy alternatives to their product. And they're still doing it today, make no mistake. And so they've done it at every level, international, federal, state, local, and that's what we need to overcome. And that's why we need to build a people-powered movement. We can't do it just with science or just with the law. We have to build a movement through organizing. And that's why I now get to pass it to Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Cassie. You bring up a lot of good points, and people power is super, super, super important. You know, we see these changes that are made when we band together, and even just in the sense that it is healing to be together in these changes and in these fights, and we know we can make it happen. So I want to know, Ben, what is a people-powered climate movement, and how do you build it?
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Brittany and Cassie. Well, I'll just start by saying one of the things that I love most about working on the Center's team is that we're truly cross-disciplinary. We have this incredible team of lawyers like Cassie that are basically inventing this field of climate law and putting it to great use. We have brilliant scientists that are translating the latest research into powerful advocacy materials. We have media specialists that can help us reach the broadest audience and get things in front of decision makers. And as a campaigner, my role is to engage grassroots activists like you and work with organizations around the country to build people power. And so Cassie already talked about how the climate crisis is caused by digging up and burning fossil fuels, and that these fossil fuels and the climate impacts that they're contributing to, they're threatening species, they're threatening our communities, they're fueling a climate catastrophe. And so there really aren't two ways about it. When we talk about people power, we're talking about stopping extracting oil, gas, coal, all fossil fuels immediately and quickly replacing them with clean energy that's fair and equitable. I'm excited for Jean to talk a little bit about our energy work in a little while. But as Cassie already laid out, we have this big problem. The fossil fuel industry is just so big and so powerful. And so, you know, these industry executives have worked for decades. They've honed this craft of deceiving the public about the dirty impacts of their product. And they have amassed virtually unlimited money and power to influence corrupt politicians. So how do we do this? How do we take on this mammoth corrupt industry and win? It's by generating people power. And so we do that by working with folks around the country like you and working with partner organizations across the broader progressive movement, from the local level all the way on up to the UN. And so this is a picture, Jean already showed you another one. We do work at international forums like the UN. This is here a few years ago, Jean and I were working with Indigenous leaders and youth activists in Germany. So we work in coalition with youth, with workers, with environmental justice groups. Why do you think we do that? It's not just because it's the right thing to do to protect people and wildlife, which it is, but it's also because we need the most powerful movement we can to tackle the fossil fuel industry. And those communities that are on the front lines, whether it's because they're young people that are going to live through the worst of these impacts, or it's because they're communities that are living next to a neighborhood oil drilling, they have the solutions. They are the ones that are closest to the problem. So if we go to the next slide, you will see, here's a picture. Many of you know who this amazing person is. This is Greta Thunberg. She's a young Swedish activist who started the global climate strike movement. Well, we had the most immense privilege to work with Greta and youth across California and put pressure on the state of California's governor, Gavin Newsom, to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And you know, this is Greta, but we're surrounded at this moment by thousands of people in the streets of Los Angeles. And this works. Only a few weeks later, Governor Newsom announced that the state would put in place the first meaningful steps towards protecting communities and wildlife from dirty energy extraction here in California. It was such a privilege to work together on this. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that it really does take a village. We were working with Greta, but these are the local youth activists here in LA that I got to work with for months and months prepping for that rally and building up their own local grassroots power in line with our statewide and national movement. So right now, we are building a national campaign that's called Climate President. And our Climate President campaign is to ensure that the next president to hold office, whoever that may be, leads us on the big, bold agenda of climate action that we've needed for so long. There's a common assumption that Congress is the only entity that has the power to take meaningful and transformative actions to address the climate crisis. Well, that simply isn't true. And as we discussed before, the root of this is what the fossil fuel industry is doing. And if it's something that's in their favor, it's not in our favor. And so the idea that Congress is holding the keys to climate action and that we someday, somehow need to move this whole body to do everything we need, it just isn't true. And it's actually a tactic to delay real action. These industries have such deep pockets and such close ties to Congress that they can count for a while still that there'll be many, many Congress members willing to delay, to dilute, to obstruct transformative climate action. So our campaign, Climate President, is to demand that and offer a roadmap for the next president on day one to use every tool in their box to keep fossil fuels in the ground first and foremost, but also to speed us on a just transition to 100% clean renewable energy. And we've laid out a detailed plan for the next president to do this, with or without Congress. And so if you check it out on climatepresident.org, thanks for putting that in the chat, Karina, you can see the whole platform there. And plug, if you're part of an organization, grassroots or local, you can invite them to join us in Climate President. And we're working with over 500 groups already around the country, not just climate groups, but also environmental justice organizations, racial and economic justice organizations, youth organizing. Together, we represent millions and millions of people. This is what it takes to build grassroots power. It takes all of us. And it takes working with the best scientists and lawyers out there, like Kassie and Jean on this call, to put together the policy platform that will get us there, that'll get us across the finish line. So in short, winning requires weaving together this widest net of people and places and issue areas and harnessing all of that power and putting pressure on our decision makers. And I'm so excited to pass this over to Brittany and then over to Jean so you all can hear about our amazing new energy justice program.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben, for that. It's really awesome, always awesome to hear the work that you're doing, and just uplifting the youth is super important. And this Climate President campaign that you're doing is really great. And I hope everyone visits the website after this call and checks out the work and signs on. And as Ben mentioned, Jean's going to be talking about our newest program for energy justice. So Jean, take us away.
Okay, hi everyone. So I don't have any slides because I think Cassie captured the incredible species that we are fighting for. Ben showed the people behind it. So I will be talking about concepts and visions of what doesn't actually exist yet, but is exactly where we need to go. One thing that I wanted to ground us in a little bit is I heard of I was in a beautiful conversation with a person today who said, you know, our history lets us see that change happens, and it kind of happens over decades. But in the last few weeks, we've seen decades happen before us because the change is coming so fast. And that to me just hit home about the type of work that we've been doing. You know, Cassie has been pioneering this work for decades. You know, Ben is younger than me. I am in the middle in this generation, and we see the rate of change and how fast it has been, but the possibility of how fast it can be. And I think like the one thing that we would love to take away from this call today is that we are all charged with acting as fast as possible, because this is actually the time to strike, and we all have the power to do it. We are seeing that in our elections right now. We are seeing that in the policies that are coming out, and we are seeing it in the remarkable number of people out on the streets going for it and demanding what they want to see as a new world. So as part of that, you know, Cassie and Ben are working so incredibly hard at putting a part of our horrific and environmental racist history to bed. They are trying to put away the fossil fuel economy that this country and that all industrialized countries have relied on since the 1800s. So that is the huge task at hand. That is what exists. My work is trying to realize the future of what we actually should have. What does that look like? Cassie was saying before that we have the technology here, but for some reason it's still not here. And part of it is because of everything that Cassie and Ben have said, the fossil fuel companies, the political will. And in the clean energy space, we're actually seeing the same types of actors there. So you might ask, we have this technology, why aren't we there yet? A lot of people don't understand that our electricity system is actually very, very heavily politicized. It is very heavily entrenched in fossil fuel interests. Your electricity utility company is still majority fossil fuel. It has, there are cross investments. They are very much the same types of actors as your oil companies. They are one and the same in terms of your fracked gas companies. But one other thing that you may not know is that they are actively obstructing your ability to go solar. We have the technology right now and the economies of scale for everybody in this country to actually develop rooftop solar and to have community solar around them. But these oil companies and these gas companies and these utilities have been working very hard to stop that. They have actually obstructive rates. They have lobbied very hard for policies that have stopped us from achieving a clean energy future. And one of the things that's really important in this idea of energy justice, which is the program that I now run, it's called Energy Justice, is that it's not just about switching a fracked gas plant into a large-scale wind plant. That's actually not the point of this transition. The point of this transition is to go beyond technology. Technology alone is not enough. It's the systems that actually have led us there that we need to be changing. So the future that we're envisioning isn't one where we are still relying on corporate utilities to feed us power. In actuality, it's one where we are so empowered, we are democratically empowered to make our own choices about energy, to have community solar around us, to have rooftop solar on top of us, so that we are in control of the choices that we make about our energy. And we have that type of community income coming back into our community, and that it is not being accumulated by a corporation. The other part about this is that this is absolutely essential for climate right now, that we have decentralized systems, because that is the only way we can be resilient when it comes to heat waves and hurricanes and COVID-19. I'll be talking about this a little bit later, but these types of emergencies basically make us super reliant on fracked gas plants very far away and corporations. But as climate is coming, this is all becoming very clear that we need to be generating our own power so we can be safe. And let me tell you, electricity to not have it is fatal. With the heat waves in winter, literally millions of families each year actually do not put their homes at safe temperatures and face fatalities because they don't have the money to generate their own electricity or the ability to. But with solar on the roofs and community solar, they have the ability to do that. And at the base of this, to have democratic decentralized power means that we also get to protect the species that we care most about in this world. There are so many species that are endangered from the fracked gas plants, from some utility scale plants and other developments on land, on public lands, and the public lands that we value. But we have so much built space right now in the buildings that we're sitting in right now, in degraded lands, in parking lots, that the entire United States actually has enough rooftop and building and degraded lands to fulfill 70% of our power needs. So these are the types of visions and future that we want to be seeing. And my program works in tandem with Cassie and Ben to make sure that we are, realizing that future together. So I'll pass it back to Brittany.
Wow, thank you, Jean. I think that's super important, just realizing the future that we can have, and we have that power to make those changes. So thank you for that. And then to move on, we've heard a lot about the work that y'all do on a very large basis, but I want to hear about what some of the most important projects you're working on right now are. So Cassie, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I would say overall legal theories and lawsuits to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And the simplest way to look at what can be a very complex problem is to look at what's called a carbon budget. So I'm actually just going to show one more slide. And you can look at the carbon budget for fossil fuels. And what this slide is showing you is the amount of fossil fuels that can be burned in order to limit warming to 2 degrees or to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. And the significance of the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees, you may have heard of this, really blockbuster report that came out a little while ago from the world's leading scientists. So it's a huge difference from that 0.5 degree. So at 1.5 degrees, for example, we may retain about 30% of the world's coral reefs. At 2 degrees, we lose 99% of coral reefs. So this is the imperatives to stay below 1.5 or 1.5 to stay alive. And what you're seeing over on the left side of this slide is that the oil, gas, and coal in already developed fields and mines globally, and so that means that they're already producing, or the capital investment has already been made in those fields, is enough to go to 2 degrees, way, way past 1.5 degrees. And the implication of that is that there's no room for any new fossil fuel development, and most of the world's fields and mines need to be closed before they are fully depleted. And that's why you see the center doing so much work on fossil fuels across all of our programs. So we're fighting really just about every attempt by the Trump administration to fast track more oil, gas, and coal development. And we're also working really hard here in California to make California a first mover on fossil fuel extraction. And it may be surprising to hear that California has been a top oil producing state for many, many years. We actually produce incredibly dirty oil here. 3/4 of the oil produced in California is more climate damaging than the oil that's produced from the tar sands of Alberta, Canada, and would be brought into this country from the Keystone Pipeline. And there is no place on earth better suited than California with its diverse economy and its reputation for environmental and climate leadership than to lead the way in making a responsible transition off of fossil fuels. So supporting workers and communities that are affected as we go, but getting off fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. So, and that's, that's if you notice in our newsletter, a lot of the items tend to be about fossil fuels. That's one of the reasons. That's why we had all those "Keep It in the Ground" banners in our introductory slides. So that's here. I'll stop this slide. Yeah. So that's what would come to mind for me, Brittany.
Cool. And Ben, do you want to jump in, and then Jean jump after Ben?
Sure. So one thing, continuing on this theme on the power and obstacle of the fossil fuel industry, you may not be surprised that they're working overtime during the COVID-19 pandemic to use this as an opportunity to basically get whatever they can, and even if it devastates their workers and the rest of our future. So what's going on right now is fossil fuel executives are essentially trying to cash in on different relief and recovery efforts that the federal government is doing to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have done some amazing work with coalition partners, over 300 coalition partners around the country, to say this is outrageous. This is absolutely not a moment to be giving 1 more cent to the fossil fuel industry. All of that money needs to go right to people and to communities and to protecting the places that we live in and that we love. And successfully, we did fend off a proposal from folks in Congress and in the White House to fill up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve with millions of taxpayer dollars for oil purchases, rather than putting that money towards protecting people. So we successfully fended that off, and that's a huge victory. Unfortunately, Congress did sort of sprinkle into their relief package a provision that includes over $400 billion and essentially condition-free loans for big corporations. And we know that those funds were designed to support the fossil fuel industry. And that has proved true over the past months. A ton of money has gone towards the fossil fuel industry. So we're fighting, continuing to fight pretty hard to make sure that we do not put a cent more into COVID relief towards fossil fuel companies, and all of that money goes to people and to communities. And I'll talk about an opportunity to take action on that in a few moments.
Hi, okay. I have a couple of things to say, but I guess I'll try to nail one or two. So as I was saying before, there have been really active utility actions to actively obstruct solar adoption. And one of the most powerful utilities in the country, and the only true federal one, is the Tennessee Valley Authority. And they have done just that. They have, there are the Walmarts and the Apples of the world who are, have committed now to 100% clean energy on their rooftops, essentially. And TVA has offered them a discounted rate on coal and fracked gas, so that they manipulated the market essentially to make it cheaper to buy coal-fired power than put rooftop solar on their warehouses. So actually, our litigation director is fighting that in court tomorrow morning in Tennessee. So that is kind of a big focus of battling bad utility behavior that stifles our clean energy transition. The other thing that I did want to point out is, Ben, Cassie, and I have been, this entire period has been one of great emergency response. And one of our kind of anchor campaigns right now is to deal with this issue of utility shutoffs across the country. So some of you may not know, but 15 million families a year are actually threatened with electricity shutoffs because they can't afford it. 1 in 5 families actually chooses to sacrifice food and medicine to sustain their power, especially in times of great heat or great winter. And so this is nothing new, but the COVID-19 crisis has entirely blasted open the crevices of this really screwed up system that we have, where energy is commodified, and it is a human right, but it is commodified. So one of the things that we've been doing is campaigning Congress to pass a nationwide moratorium on those shutoffs during this time of extreme economic stress on people, so that they still have the ability to have electricity. And it was an incredible effort. The Black Lives Movement, the Movement for Black Lives, endorsed this effort of utility shutoffs in solidarity with Black families. And we had 830 groups across the country come and campaign on this hard. The House actually came out in support of this, as well as Senator Schumer. So we actually have some congressional legs under this. But the kind of heart of the moratorium issue is not just for status quo relief or relief like short-term relief. It's actually to get in more funds for what I was talking about before, the decentralized systems of rooftop and community solar, especially for the families, Black, Brown, and Indigenous and communities of color, who have always borne the brunt of environmental racism and coal plants in 30 miles away from them. So our goal with this campaign, which is right now kind of sitting in the hands of Mitch McConnell, is to achieve a moratorium in the short run, but in the long run, actually achieve the desperate financing that we need for decentralized energy. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all for talking about some of the other work that you do and the important issues that you're working on. It's really great to hear, and to work with such wonderful and amazing people. And for our last kind of part of this section, I wanted to ask, we talked a lot about people power today. What can the folks on this webinar do today, or how can they help?
I'm so glad you asked. building on where Jean just left off, again, the same people that are affected by utility shutoffs and that are overburdened by fossil fuel pollution in their neighborhoods are also bearing the brunt of the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we have an action alert going to protect people and not bail out the fossil fuel industry, to make sure that any COVID-19 relief and recovery legislation holds that line so we can build out that just transition off of fossil fuels going forward, so we can move forward and not take one step back. So we'd love you all to take action with us, and we have an action alert for you to tell your senators. Focus those pieces of legislation you develop over the next months and years on helping people, and don't put one additional cent into bailing out the big oil industry.
Yes, exactly. And I believe that link was just dropped in the chat. So definitely open that up in a separate tab. And again, thank you so much for being on this webinar. We have our question and answer section, but I always, one more round of applause, I swear. But for Karina and Tiara, who have been on the background on tech, and for all of our wonderful speakers today, and for all of y'all being on this webinar, it's really great that we get to, talk together and, share these moments. So with that, everyone's favorite part, question and answers. And so we have a bunch of questions and not too much time. So we're gonna go through these. And if we do not get to your question or you have more, jump on Slack tomorrow, 12 to 1 p.m. Pacific time. Ben and I will be there to answer your questions. Okay, first question is, as the US government has left the Paris Climate Change Agreement, what are green orgs doing? Is this proving successful for the social and political change required?
Jean, do you want to start, or Ben, or?
You can go first.
Yeah, so, Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement that was negotiated in Paris in 2015. And, unfortunately, what green groups have been doing for 3.5 years now at the federal level under the Trump administration is playing an awful lot of defense. And so, and we're playing defense in the courts. It's never been so clear my entire career just how important litigation is to hold the line in terms of overturning and delaying all of these attempts to fast track more fossil fuel development, roll back so many of our critically important environmental laws. And so unfortunately, structurally at the international level, and Jean now actually leads our delegations to the international climate talks in addition to her other hat as the Energy Justice Program Director. And so Jean may also want to jump in here. And so we're laying the groundwork, and Ben talked about climate president. The top 10 things that the next president has to do the minute they enter the Oval Office. And one of those things is not just rejoin Paris, but actually move the world forward and show actual leadership on the international stage to greatly, greatly increase the ambition of the US commitments in the international negotiations in order to just accelerate that international process that has been hurt so much. So that's all I've got. Jean may want to add. Great question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. One of the things that a lot of people have said in response to the pullout of the Paris Agreement is, screw it. We don't need it. We're going to fight for internally the most reductions that we can get in carbon emissions. And that is like, as citizens of this country or as residents of this country, getting down our own level of carbon emissions is absolutely important. But what people don't understand necessarily is that the US is the #1 historical emitter of carbon emissions in this world. That means we have an essential responsibility to fulfill our fair share of how we hurt the rest of the planet. And that doesn't mean just cutting back at home. That means actually going out there into the world, leading and committing other people to their reductions, but getting the finance out to the countries and the people who have suffered the most from this crisis and who did nothing, almost nothing, to to bring it about. And I say this because I started my climate career as a development worker in Madagascar. And these people basically, in 2006 experienced freak cyclones and continue to do that, that are charged by climate. And they cannot dig themselves out of a hole into development. They suffer incredible heat waves and incredible floods where people are dying every year and they just cannot get out of a level of fragility. That is caused by industrialized countries like the US and others. And we have a responsibility in this country to fulfill that moral obligation abroad.
Dang, thank you for those powerful answers. So we have a very popular question that folks have asked, which is, are there currently other avenues / work going into making solar, wind, and electric cars more accessible to the average and low income family?
Yes. Well, so it's not going fast enough. So there are a ton of policies right now that don't get us there, and there's a ton of policy work that needs to be done. So unfortunately, I think in the fossil fuel space, there's actually a lot of good laws out there, as Cassie was saying, that you can, litigate it and get down fossil fuels. On the clean energy side, it's a little bit less developed, and for good reason, because industry just hasn't gotten there, and the solar and wind industry are just not strong enough yet. So policy is actually super important on this, including renewable portfolio standards. But more important than that, it's actually state policies that get us to developing community solar and rooftop solar. Those are all on state levels, and federal levels haven't gotten there. So one of the most important things that people can do is actually realize that your climate policy on a state level, the forefront of that is actually your utility commission, which you may not know, and your state legislature. Those are the places that are at the forefront of making climate policy within your state. You have to go out there and actually fight for policy that allows for community solar. So many states in this country don't even allow for people to have community solar and low-income families to have that. And to also fight recuperating policies at the PUC level, at the utility commission level, to fairly compensate people for putting rooftop solar on them. So we can talk about this a lot more. There are a lot of policies that need to be put in place. A lot of good things happening in California, but across the country, everyone needs to move far, far faster in making sure that this is not only energy for the rich. This has to be energy from the bottom up for everybody.
Yep.
I would just add that we're in this remarkable moment in so many ways, but one of the opportunities we have facing the economic downturn from COVID-19 is a tremendous need to have a recovery be 100% green, zero emissions, just recovery. And the things that we need to do, zero emissions infrastructure projects, the investments we need to make, not only make clean energy more available to everybody, but they also happen to be the things that are the best jobs creators and that have the biggest economic multiplier effect, that are the best things you could do for the COVID downturn. So a lot of groups are working on that, and it's just a super critical moment to make sure that all economic recovery efforts go into the future we need and not into more dirty fossil fuels.
Cool, thank you. And for our next question, we have, how do you all work with Indigenous people and center Indigenous voices in regards to the climate movement?
Yeah, I can say a few things, and I know Jean and Cassie could as well. We've been very privileged to work with Indigenous partners for a long time, both at the national level and regionally. A lot of our climate work has long been in California, and there is an amazing movement across the state for Indigenous rights that is really deeply tied with the movement for environmental justice in terms of where energy is located, but also respecting, especially along the Central Coast, where one of the areas where there's a hotspot of drilling, really respecting the land that's affecting and the peoples of that land. And I would also just say, nationally and internationally, Indigenous peoples have been way ahead of the rest of us in terms of identifying the problems and showing the way with the solutions. And you saw some of our work at the UN. These are long-term partners. Chief Nineveh there, I know Brittany works with Chief Nineveh as well, and our grassroots global justice partners who we've been working with has been, really going way out of their community to push for justice, because the system is rigged against people that are historically marginalized and who are not recognized as a country in a lot of cases. So this work really scales from the local and to the global. And honestly, it's such an honor and a privilege to be able to work with folks that have solutions based on their traditional cultures and their modern day experience of being right there at the front lines.
Thank you, Ben. It's, close issues to my heart as an Indigenous person, and it's a lot of, what the work that I do as Saving Life on Earth campaigner and, just in general, part of my life. So thank you for that answer. And then moving right along, we have, what about backing Project Drawdown or the Rewind Act or Rewind Act? Is there a new version of the Green New Deal to fight for?
Well, I can say something about the Rewind Act, which is a piece of legislation that some of our allies in Congress put forward to prevent a big oil bailout. So we are really grateful for their leadership and following the movement and demanding that. That hasn't passed yet, and we do, of course, support passing the Rewind Act as quickly as possible or incorporating it into future COVID relief and recovery legislation. So that would basically say, yeah, we're not going to put money in terms of taxpayer money towards a big oil bailout, and we do support it. The broader movement for this is, as Cassie said, I think this is a moment where there is intensive need for economic recovery and for building out a just recovery, and that will lead us and must lead us towards the bigger scale change, which we can call a Green New Deal, and which certainly incorporates this just transition off of fossil fuel extraction to renewable. So yes is the short answer, and I don't know if Jean or Cassie want to add on.
Well, oh, Cassie, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh no, I was just saying I didn't. Good answer by Ben.
Oh, cool. Okay, well, that kind of connects to the next question, which is what we can do to build the global unity for renewable clean energy. So y'all want to answer that?
So the question is global unity on renewable energy? Is that?
Yeah.
So what we can do, there are, right now, there are a lot of poor countries that actually have the ability to leapfrog. This is it's a difficult question because there's just tiers of different countries. One of the most powerful ways that we can forward kind of, human rights and species rights, as well as, resolve the climate or address the climate emergency is for certain countries to basically bypass the fossil fuel era and go very hard on renewables. And one of the fabulous parts, especially about certain places in sub-Saharan Africa and certain places in Latin America, is that they have been very fast at adopting distributed solar, because actually they aren't in a place where they can put in this dinosaur infrastructure of power lines and fracked gas plants and coal plants. So those countries are in a wonderful position to do that, but in a lot of ways they are lacking the finance. So that's where industrialized countries, their financial contributions are actually critical to making that happen in those other countries. And then we see tiers otherwise. So, there are the industrializing countries, a lot of them in Southeast and East Asia, which have been very coal dependent. And they right now are also, they have built out centralized systems, but many of those are changing. And then in terms of the US and Europe, the US is behind in a lot of ways. Germany actually has been at the forefront. Certain places in Scandinavia have been at the forefront of actually making and committing to and then realizing incredible renewable energy standards. So the US is a pariah in that sense, and we have a very dinosaur way of doing things. And so we can actually learn a lot more from the global context and bring it home here.
Thank you. And okay, so we have time for maybe one last question. There's a bunch of them, but I'm just going to ask, what about cutting our own carbon footprint? Do we need to do that as the last question here?
We love that question. And cutting our carbon footprint is a great thing to do. It's like, it's fun, it's satisfying, it's healthy for us. So please don't take the next part of my answer in any way as criticism of all the good things we need to do. However, I would say that more important than that is we need the government policy changes that make the clean energy solutions available to everybody. And it's just simply not structurally possible to solve the problem, I don't believe, with 7 billion people making voluntary choices to cut their carbon footprints. Because even if we could do that, because of government policy, it's not possible for many, many people to do it because the solutions are not available to them. And also, unfortunately, the fossil fuel polluters have weaponized this very good impulse of so many people to say, I want to take personal responsibility and I want to solve the problem through my actions, which is a great impulse. We should do it. However, the polluters, if you look at their communications going back decades, they very, very consciously have PR campaigns and strategies to switch what's really a question of government policy into a question of personal responsibility. We see it in their PR, we see it in their surrogates, in Congress, the way they think, the way they talk, and we even see it in court decisions now about trying to switch the responsibility where judges, they buy this and they say, how can I hold these fossil fuel polluters accountable because we all use fossil fuels? People use fossil fuels because the polluters have blocked the government policies that would have made the world a better place and saved us money because they had the political power to do it. So thank you for that wonderful question, and please do keep taking good actions, but also continue to join us in fighting for the policy changes we need.
Yeah, and I think that pretty much sums up, a lot of what we talked about today and how it's, coming from a lot of different angles, how we're going to, stop climate change and really, start, going towards a better and more sustainable world. And with that, thank you again for being on this webinar. Y'all are amazing, and everyone, just watching, y'all are amazing too. You're going to get an email with the link for the action alert tomorrow, and if your question wasn't answered or you have some burning questions you still want to ask, one more time, Ben and I will be on Slack from 12 to 1 p.m. Pacific to answer any questions and just hang out and chat if that's what you want to do. And then we have an upcoming webinar on Wednesday, July 1st. That's going to be about organizing to end wildlife trade. You don't want to miss that one, so sign up today. And thank you again. Everyone have a great evening or day, depending on where you're calling in from, and see you all next time.
Thanks all. See some of you tomorrow.
Thank you.